This is the Google Pixel 6, and this is the Google Pixel 6a, and the decision around which one you should buy really isn't as difficult as it should be. The Google Pixel 6a was announced at the company's annual I/O conference in May 2022. But it took until June 21st for pre-orders to start. And with a true release date of June 28th, that means that it comes 9 months after the rest of the Google Pixel 6 family. The handset cost $449 for its only configuration with 128GB of storage. And yes, that is lower than the $599 of the Pixel 6, but this is a handset that's enjoyed many months of price cuts, and in some regions the Pixel 6 has come lower than the launch price of the 6a. So then it's pretty easy to say this would have been a more competitive phone, both against other Pixel phones and the slew of affordable phones on the market right now, if the starting price of the Pixel 6a had just been a bit lower. The Google Pixel 6a retains that same design language as its older siblings, but there are a few changes here for better and worse. Let's start with the good stuff. This phone is fairly small and lightweight, making it easily pocketable. And that's not just compared to the other Pixel 6 phones, but also most of the smartphones currently out there. And big bonus points, as it's incredibly comfortable to use in one hand. That camera bar on the back of the phone is actually much smaller than the one on the Pixel 6, so it doesn't gather nearly as much dust as its siblings does. And now onto the less so good stuff. The Pixel 6a has a plastic rear, unlike its glass older siblings, and this makes it feel a little bit cheap. Still, plastic holds up well against impacts and drops, so it's not all bad news. The Pixel 6a doesn't have a headphone jack, and that's a first for the Google A series phones, and I'm sure it's a deal breaker for some of you. Just like the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro before it, the 6a's fingerprint scanner is built into the display, but it's much more intuitive and snappy than the previous phones, seemingly solving one of our biggest complaints about the Pixel 6 line when it launched. The Google Pixel 6a is a 6.1-inch display, making it smaller than the 6.4-inch panel on the Pixel 6. It offers the same resolution of 1080 by 2400 though. That's the resolution that the vast majority of smartphones use, and for good reason. Most of the apps you'll be using, including streaming services and games, all output at that resolution, so then the 6a is certainly fit for purpose in that department. One slight oddity is the phone's refresh rate of 60Hz. This was standard for many years, but now most phones use 90Hz, 120Hz, or even higher refresh rates. Saying that, not everybody really cares about that sort of thing. So let me know down in the comments below, is 60 frames per second just not enough for you, or do you really not care? The display is broken up by a punch hole camera at the top. No need to worry though, this isn't huge and doesn't take up much space. The Google Pixel 6a's whole deal is about getting the Pixel 6 experience on a bit of a budget, but the camera is a good example of where that budget is making an impact. Instead of using the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro's 50-megapixel main camera, the Pixel 6a gets a 12.2-megapixel f1.7 which sits alongside a 12-megapixel f2.2 ultra-wide snapper with a 114-degree field of view. Pictures are good. Sure, they're not going to match the snaps taken on the standard Pixel 6 in terms of vibrancy or detail, but they will beat out almost any other handset at this price point. That's likely thanks to Google's AI scene optimization, which can tweak pictures depending on the setting to make them as attractive as possible. There's no optical zoom here, and digital zoom only goes up to 7 times, so don't expect to capture long-distance shots. You'll lose detail the further you zoom in, although when you are maxing out that zoom, the images aren't too grainy. On the front there's an 8-megapixel f2.0 selfie snapper, which is a little low res compared to the front cameras on rival devices, but the selfie camera performs just fine. In well-lit conditions, selfies look fairly bright and colourful, but not always. The Pixel 6a isn't phenomenal at being accurate in its blurring of backgrounds. To sum it up, the 6a is good, but not great for selfies. The AI really is the saving grace of this phone, with a few flagship features of the original Pixel 6 Duo present here too. Magic Eraser is a great one. It lets you click on an unwanted element in the background of snaps and will use AI to remove them and fill in the background. It's a fun tool to play around with, and depending on the photo, it can provide some pretty believable results. Video recording goes up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which is all anybody really needs. Plus you're getting a range of modes like time-lapse and slow motion as well. The front-facing camera maxes out at 1080p though, that's a side effect of that 8 megapixel sensor at the front there, but does have a mode called speech enhancement, which is currently off and now is on. So let me know down in the comments below if you think you can hear an improvement or not. Google opted to use the same chip in the Pixel 6a as the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, and that's its self-designed Tensor chipset. This means that the three phones are equally powerful. When we tested the Google Pixel 6 using our benchmarking app, it returned a multi-core score of 2,837, which is on the boundary between mid-range and top-end power. We'd have liked to have tested this too on the 6a, but curiously, benchmarking apps were blocked on our test unit. Our day-to-day experience though seems to back up this figure. It's snappy enough for navigation and most tasks, but now and then it's slowed down when we were taxing it too much. That's not really unusual, but you just can't switch between games and streaming services without noticing a few jitters. But this isn't really a phone designed for gamers with its middle range chip and small display, so it's unlikely that too many customers will mind. The only configuration that you'll be able to pick up of this phone has 6GB of RAM, and its chipset has a 5G modem, so you can connect to the next-gen networks if you're on the right contract. Your speed will of course depend on your area and provider more so than the phone though. The Google Pixel 6a comes on stock Android, as do all the phones that come from Google because they make Android. The newest version of the software is Android 12, though the 6a will likely be one of the first devices eligible for Android 13 when it launches. Smartphone battery life is often hard to quantify. A device might perform well in lab-based tests, but struggle in everyday use, given the huge variance of screen-on time that you'll use in your day-to-day. And as such, testers like us can be hesitant to provide divisive verdicts on a phone's lasting power. Thankfully though, we don't have to beat around the bush on this one. The Google Pixel 6a's battery is clearly abysmal. The Pixel often struggled to last a full day of use, even when we had battery saver mode activated the whole time. And we're not talking about a day of hardcore gaming, video recording, and all the rest of it. The Pixel 6a struggled even with medium use. And don't get us started on how long the Pixel 6a would last without battery saver mode on. Our complaints would last longer than the phone would. Well, okay, look, that's hyperbolic, but we were seriously disappointed by the phone's lasting power. The battery is a 4410 mAh one, which isn't even really small for a phone of its size, so we can't get our heads around why it doesn't last longer. Credit where credit's due, Google has some helpful battery health features. For example, if you plug the device in overnight, it can check when your alarm is set for and make sure your phone is at 100% for that time. But this really doesn't make up for the poor performance. We're hoping that Google improves this through software updates and optimizations, but only time will tell. We'd love to recommend the Google Pixel 6a. Budget alternatives to flagship phones are always interesting thanks to their more competitive prices and feature sets, but it has one minor and one more major issue that makes it really hard to recommend. The minor issue is the presence of the Google Pixel 6. Thanks to 9 months of price cuts and reductions and deals, both phones pretty much cost the same at this point, and in some regions the 6 is cheaper. So it's super hard to recommend a lesser phone when the more premium one won't set you back all that much more. But the bigger issue is something we've already mentioned, it's that battery life. It's just dreadful. Since battery life is such a core aspect of a phone, it's hard to recommend the Google Pixel 6a, despite it having some seriously strong qualities. It's a real shame that the Google Pixel 6a's battery life is such an Achilles heel, because if this phone lasted just a little bit longer and the price was just a little bit more competitive, it'd be a really great budget handset. The battery life issue won't ruin the phone for everyone, but it does make you stop and think, can you put up with a phone that needs to be charged multiple times a day? If you can, that's great, but we'd imagine a lot of people will rule this phone out based on that one simple issue. we give the Google Pixel 6a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments below which you'd recommend, the Pixel 6 or the Pixel 6a. While you're down there, leave a like on the video and subscribe to TechRadar here on YouTube so you won't miss any of our future tech reviews and news.